مولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I pray that all of you are well, inshallah ta'ala. Yesterday I was invited to speak at a national MSA event on forging Muslim masculinity. So some of you may have seen the talk. I thought I'd just summarize some of the teachings and maybe just add some further reflections on this topic. I won't maybe go through the whole discussion again, but just to mention that that discussions on gender, masculinity, femininity, gender relations are becoming increasingly complex for a number of reasons. One is because that as Muslims we have a very kind of structured religious framework. We have the words of the Quran, we have the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have our legacy of scholarship, and we have that as a very definite reference point. However, number two, we find ourselves in a world where there are multiple ideologies from the liberal left until the conservative right, and a whole spectrum in between. And then also we have kind of a high prevalence of gender-based violence. We have incidents of police brutality internationally, and this also kind of feeds into the discussion on gender roles, and so on. And then also, I think the number four is the nature of the media. I think one thing about the media generally is that the media generally shares bad news, which is fine because that's how the media works. But there is also lots of good news, and there are also many positive examples, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. Otherwise, we get a skewed perception of reality. And then finally, I think social media and all the millions of social commentators add more confusion to the whole discussion. So I think I wanted to just mention something. I've mentioned this before in this class as a Naseehah, but I'll just something I mentioned again, is that we as Muslims believe that the Quran to be the word of Allah Ta'ala, the uncreated word of Allah Ta'ala, the perfect word of Allah Ta'ala, and so it has authority in our life. And then we find that there are a number of external paradigms or external reference points, like to what extent is the Quran or Islam patriarchal? To what extent is the Quran or Islam feminist? To what extent is the Quran or Islam about equality or about equity? Or to what extent is that democratic? Or to what extent does it reflect our cultural norms? Or is it a political text? Is it apolitical? Is it capitalist? Is it socialist? I think all of these kind of frameworks are frameworks of the modern world. All of these are founded in the modern world, and then when someone comes to the Quran, they look for those elements. And I think just to maybe clarify, there's no issue if you have a certain framework and you want to compare to the Quran to see if the Quran is consistent with that framework. For example, if you believe in capitalism and you believe in the right to private property ownership, and you come to the Quran and see, does the Quran support the ownership of private property? And you find, okay, the Quran does support the ownership of private property. So that aspect kind of accords. But then it is problematic in a sense to take selected verses and then say the Quran is capitalist, because capitalism is much more than that. It is and the teachings of the Quran are much more than the ownership of private property. There are many other perspectives, many other branches of economic theory within the Quran. So what I want to mention is that my main kind of concern, and especially to young students who are entering university, is that and the media and in politics is that these frameworks are just lenses that you come to the Quran with. In no way should one take the lens and try to make the Quran accord with it. That wouldn't be a faithful reading of the Quran. So I think just to caution against it. I'm not saying you can't bring the lens. You can bring the lens and see what you find in the Quran and see if it accords, but don't make the Quran accord to something which it doesn't do in a in an authentic way. So the question then is, how do I know what the Quran really says? Like, how do I know what the Quran really says? And for me, the answer is actually profoundly simple. And sometimes sometimes I find that almost is like a need to say simple things in like sophisticated ways so people like listen to you. But the answer is like really simple. It's a very simple answer. Is that the lens we look to the Quran with is the prophetic lens. It's like number one. Like that's like number one fundamental. The Prophet ﷺ is the muallim of the Quran. The Prophet Allah Ta'ala calls the Prophet ﷺ the muallim of the Quran. يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب. Allah Himself says the Prophet ﷺ is the teacher of the Quran. Aisha radiallahu anha calls the Prophet ﷺ the living Quran. So don't lose sight of this very, very simple but important fundamental perspective is that you cannot read the Quran without Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if someone says, I only follow Quran, or I don't follow the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or I don't trust the vast body of Hadith, that for me is there should be immediate alarm bells. Because you are going against the word of the Quran, which is Allah's word. And Allah's word places Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the lens of the Quran, as the explainer of the Quran. His life, his words, his character, his actions, all of it is an elucidation of the Quran. So it's a very simple perspective, and I think that simplicity is lost in some of these more philosophical discussions at times. And then one through that will reach a conclusion that is consistent with the intent of revelation. And I think this is the other thing which is like very fundamental, is that truth for a Muslim is not relative. Truth for a Muslim is absolute, especially foundational. I'm talking about secondary fiqh questions. I'm talking about primary foundational truths. We believe Allah to be the true. His name is Al-Haq, the one who is true. So when Allah Ta'ala reveals guidance and truths to mankind, it doesn't, Allah is revealing something which is true. Allah doesn't like reveal something which we can like make up stuff about. There is an intent behind the text, and the intent is to share truth with humankind to serve as a form of guidance. There is intent behind the text, and that's important. And the Quran itself says that there are ayat which are muhkamat, which are absolutely clear. When an ayah is muhkama, it means that there is no ikhtilaf on the ayah. Between the scholars, there is no disagreement on the ayah. And Allah Ta'ala calls these ayat hunna ummul kitab. It is the foundation, the mother of the book. So sometimes also the discussion of ikhtilaf is sometimes thrown at everything. There are things in which there are no ikhtilaf upon. Your belief in Allah, in the Messenger, in the last day, in heaven, in hell, there's no ikhtilaf about that. The fact that Allah Ta'ala is your Lord and you are His slave, there's no ikhtilaf about that. The fact that you have to pray 5 times a day, you have to fast, you have to go on Hajj, there's no ikhtilaf about this. There's no ikhtilaf about the fundamentals of faith. The fact that you have to be a person of sabr, a person of tawakkul, a person of khushu, a person of hope, of raja, of khawf. There's no ikhtilaf about those things. The fact that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the teacher of the Quran, there's no ikhtilaf about these things. There's no difference on the fundamentals of faith. And if you can, and I'll just spend some time here, is that it's important, like Islam is evidence based. Yes, there is a spiritual dimension and there's a metaphysical dimension which affects your ruh and your spiritual heart. But when it comes to the rational, intellectual dimension, it is evidence based, and the evidence is two parts. The evidence is, what do you take as a body of evidence as authority, and number two is, how do you interpret that? So two questions you have to always answer is, what is your sources of what are your sources of evidence, and number two, what is your interpretive methodology, your hermeneutic around interpreting those authoritative evidence. So it's very simple, the discussion. It's a simple discussion that the words of the Quran and the authentic hadith sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the body of authoritative text. So logically, any conclusion that you reach must comprehensively take into account all the authoritative text. I find too often people have positions and they cherry pick one or two ayat or one or two hadith and say, there, you see, Islam says that, ignoring the other 10 or 20 statements about the same subject. It's very, very problematic. And it's done by both ends of the camp, the liberal left and the conservative right. Because the one is trying to kind of release Islam from all of these restrictions and like change things, and the other one side to like keep and preserve and fix things with no change. And I think it's both problematic. So number one is that just from a purely logical methodological point of view, that to reach any conclusion, it has to have a comprehensive assessment, accountability of all the words of the Quran and all the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all the authentic narrations of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's number one. Number two is that, so that's in terms of sorting out what the source text is. Number two is that there has to be a consistent hermeneutic, there has to be a consistent methodology of interpretation. You can't just willy-nilly make some stuff literal and willy-nilly make some stuff figurative and just have like a haphazard approach to your method of interpretation because it suits a preconceived narrative or bias. You have to have a consistent hermeneutic, a consistent approach towards the Quran. And number three is that you have to have cogent arguments which make sense, arguments which are rational, arguments which are logical. And if one applies this methodology, you come to a result where there is foundational certainty on the essentials of faith. The Ummul Kitab, the Muhkamat, the foundational issues, and there is ikhtilaf on the furu', on the secondary issues of application. And that's the approach. And if you haven't studied Islam, I don't think one can fully appreciate the degree to which this approach has been executed in Islam. I mean, if it's just absolutely like mind-blowing that these source texts have been studied on a word level. On a word level, I'm talking about meaning, about tafsir, on a sentence level, on a surah level, on a chapter level, in terms of what the subject matter level. There's entire branches of what is the creed that we derive, the belief system that we derive from all of this text. What is our belief system as a comprehensive assessment? What is our legal theory from all of this text? What is the legal theory, the hermeneutic we're going to apply to derive the conclusions? What is our jurisprudence, our law that comes from all of this text? What is our method of authentication of hadith? When I say hadith is authentic, there's a whole science about what does it mean for a hadith to be authentic. And then as we are studying this, the text of the Quran and the hadith, it's not only the direct study, it's also what are the fruits of that. What are the legal maxims that come out of that? What are the higher intents, the maqasid of the law? So it is in the nature of the divine word that it is studied from every perspective, from a linguistic perspective, from a legal perspective, from a creed perspective, from a historical perspective, from a linguistic perspective, from every perspective the words of Allah have been studied. From every perspective the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has been studied. And really, there is such a tendency now just to kind of wipe away this whole legacy and say, okay, let's wipe everything away and just look at a few verses of the Quran and come to a conclusion. That is a great disservice and distortion of our faith. And I think we have to be careful about that. I want to speak about something else which is very topical, which is the issue of there is male privilege and bias in interpreting the text because males have done it. I think that is problematic from a number of reasons. Number one is that it discounts an entire legacy of female scholarship within Islam. An entire legacy. I don't think you're going to find any other faith that has such a long and deep history of female scholarship as you have with Islam. Starting from the generation of the Sahaba, where many people hold Aisha radiallahu anha to be the faqih of the Sahaba, to be the primary scholar amongst the Sahaba. And many other examples, countless examples. So I think that number one, it discounts female scholarship. The second problem with that is that the majority of the conclusions and sciences have nothing to do with gender. Your entire aqidah, your belief in Allah and angels and messengers and books and decree has nothing to do with gender. Your entire study of legal theory of what's your epistemology, what's your hermeneutic has nothing to do with gender. The entire study of the verification of hadith have nothing to do with gender. The entire study of maqasid has nothing to do with gender. The entire study of qawaid al-fiqhiyya has nothing to do with gender. Only a limited number of matters within fiqh have to do with gender. So the whole argument, there's no room for bias because it has nothing to do with matters of gender. Much of the law. And then those matters of gender, it has to do with gender. The nature of text is that when you have a statement can only have a limited number of meanings. If I say the sky is blue, there's only really one meaning to that. You can't come up with many other meanings. But when I say it's a blue Monday, you could think I'm meaning that literally, like I look out of the window and mashallah the sky is blue, or maybe I'm meaning that metaphorically, which meaning it's a bad Monday. It's a difficult Monday. So therefore, I have two meanings. I have a literal meaning which I can apply and a metaphorical meaning. So what I'm saying is you can't make up a whole host of meanings. There are a limited number of meanings which the text basically is able to produce. So no matter what your gender, whether you're male or female, when a text says something, you are in a sense a prisoner of the text. You are a prisoner of the text, and you have very limited scope in terms of which way you can move. So just to relegate this whole legacy to male bias for me is either done with someone who has not studied this tradition, who doesn't understand our law, who doesn't understand our methodology, who has not spent time with it, or someone who has an ill intention to try to to remove this significant body of our scholarship, of our legacy that has been transmitted from the time of Sahaba to the Tabi'in all the way to our time with refinement throughout the generations. So I think this is important in terms of approach to the discussion. This talk might require two parts. If I can ask you just to please remember to keep off your Your mics, please. Oh, just the admins to turn off the mics, please. Next thing, and maybe we can in a sense maybe end with this. Allah Ta'ala says, يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. This is often read at the Surah An-Nisa, the first verse, often read as part of the khutbah nikah. Allah Ta'ala addresses all people. Ya ayyuhan nas. O people, people of the world, people of existence. Ittaqu rabbakum. Have taqwa of your Lord. Alladhi, the one that khalaqakum, he created you min nafsin wahida. He created you from one nafs. So all of us come from Nabi Adam alayhi salam. Nabi Adam contains all of humankind. And in a sense, Nabi Adam is the store of everyone. Whether they be males or females, Nabi Adam is the store of everyone. Because Hawa alayhi salam is created from Nabi Adam. So in Nabi Adam is everything. And in a sense, there's the idea of the universal person. There's a universal person. And for me, it's very clear that the majority of the Quranic text and the prophetic text is not about gender, it's about the human condition, about this universal person. This universal person that has an aql, that has an intellect, that has a qalb, that has a ruh, that has a nafs, that is struggling through life, that is trying to figure out the truth, he's trying to walk the path. This is what the majority of the text, the overwhelming majority of the text is about. Number one, the fundamental, the first thing the Quran wants to establish is Iman. Inna ladina amanu wa amilu salihat. Iman has nothing to do with your gender. Whether you're male or female, you are mukallaf with the same Iman. The same Iman. So there's a universalism about the Quran. Number two, your devotion and prayer. The fact that you have to connect to Allah Ta'ala, you have to pray, you have to remember Him, you have to give charity. Your devotion to Allah Ta'ala is the same for male or female. Yes, there are some secondary differences in terms of tahara and hayd and all those things, but those are secondary things. In terms of fundamentally, when Allah Ta'ala says you must establish prayer, it is a directive towards males and females. So there is no differentiation in the essential message. In terms of intelligence, Allah Ta'ala tells people to to tafakkaru, afala ta'qilun, afala ya'qilun, tadabbaru, to think, to ponder, to reflect. These are not gender specific. Scholarship in Islam is open to males and females. It has always been that way since the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Always been that way. Imamat specifically is a functionary position where someone leads the salah. But imamat and alim is a very different thing. Sometimes an imam can be an alim, but many ulama are not imams. Many ulama don't belong to a mosque and read salah on a daily basis. They're not part of the imamat. So separate imamat from being a scholar of Islam, and being a scholar of Islam is open to everybody. In terms of spirituality, to be a wali, to be close to Allah Ta'ala, to be a friend of Allah Ta'ala, for Allah to be pleased with you, has nothing to do with gender. So sometimes it's such a reflection. We imagine that there's two different faiths for males and females. It's not at all like that. There is one universal message that cuts across. And yes, there are secondary issues which I maybe discussing in the next Naseehah, inshallah. But I want to emphasize this because there is a universalism about the human condition. And therefore the Quran is timeless, because the human condition 1400 years ago, in the time of the Sahaba, or 2000 years ago, in the time of Nabi Isa, or whatever time, the human condition stays the human condition. Whether you're living in a small village somewhere, whether you're living in an urban area, the human condition stays the human condition, and therefore the message of the Quran is timeless, because this human condition will persist until Qiyamah. So these are just some reflections. I think maybe the first part of the talk which I want to emphasize is that there has to be a certain and established approach to understanding Islam, else we run the risk of opening Islam to anybody who says anything. And if that continues, then in the end, what's left of Sirat al-Mustaqim, of the path of the prophets? What's left of that if everybody says anything about Islam? So this is just, I mean, I didn't touch much on gender for now and masculinity, but I think this is the setting the foundation first. And I think it's an important foundation. I know I mentioned it a few times before, but I want to establish that this is the foundation. And the foundation is open to anybody who wants to participate. No one is saying there's a monopoly on interpretation or monopoly on intelligence or a monopoly on academia. No one, the door has always been open. The door has always been open to anybody who wants to participate. But you obviously have to participate uh, as part of with the same idea of what is evidence in your mind. For example, if you enter into medicine, yes, you may have a ikhtilaf as a doctor, but you have to have, there are certain fundamentals which you have to agree to. You have to like agree to empirical evidence as a foundation. Like a simple thing as being a doctor is you have to agree that you are going to play by the rules of empirical evidence. Imagine a doctor didn't play by those rules and just said, I think, and I mean, what's left of medicine after that? So the same thing about this is when you enter, there has to be an agreement that this is an evidence-based discussion. It's an evidence-based discussion, and you have to account for all the evidence, and you have to state what your hermeneutic, what your methodology of interpretation is, and then the discussion can begin. It's not just some willy-nilly thing. Anyway, so that's just some points that I want to mention, and I think the discussion. I wish we were in class to discuss this more, but we can pick up the discussion next week, inshallah. Those of you who want to listen to the talk has been sent to you, and we can engage more on the topic. I think it's an important topic, masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? Those are important discussions, and inshallah we'll carry on next week, inshallah. May Allah bless and protect all of you. May Allah guide our hearts. Ya Rabbi, may Allah make our intentions pure. May Allah suppress our nafs. May Allah Ta'ala illuminate our hearts towards what is true. May Allah Ta'ala speak words that please Him. May Allah Ta'ala make us faithful in our approach to Islam. May Allah Ta'ala not hold us account for any of the errors and shortcomings that we have. This is not something which is to be spoken about lightly. So we always beseech Allah for His guidance, for His protection, for His acceptance, for His direction. May Allah bless and protect you and your families. Barakallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.